So many topics to touch on this morning, so we're joined by CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. He's in our Washington bureau. Ed, good morning. From the border to two huge bills being discussed contentiously, a potential shutdown. I think it's dizzying for even those who cover Congress and the White House full time. Some of it comes to a head on Monday. What is happening in Washington?
Yeah, well, to paraphrase Elvis, a lot of conversation, very little action, I think, is part of the problem here as they try to sort out a host of issues. Immigration, just a reminder again this week of how urgent and acute that one is. You continue to see no progress on things like voting rights and police reform. These are things the president promised to figure out. But with Republicans and Democrats unable to agree on them, it's likely they're going to just linger into next year and become fodder for the congressional elections. The issue, of course, is that there's all this urgent financial, economic-related legislation that has to get through, and even there, they've got big disagreements.
And Ed, Jeff mentioned Monday the House is supposed to, the Senate is supposed to take up the House-passed bill on the government shutdown. What can you tell us about what we may see in a vote and what could come from it?
That's right. This is designed to try to keep the lights on. They're supposed to get this done by the end of the fiscal year, at the end of the month. The House passed it. The problem is in the Senate, you've got to get Republican support, at least 10 votes from them. Right now, they're not planning to do that. So this test vote on the bill, likely to fail, which is going to lead Democrats to have to go back and try to come up with something that could get Republican support by Thursday when the deadline happens. We've had shutdowns before in this city. It happens across the federal government. The difference this time, of course, is we haven't had a shutdown during a pandemic. Don't be surprised if Democrats continue to amplify that point in the coming days to try to put some pressure on Republicans to get this part of the equation taken care of.
Well, both sides are also butting heads over this issue of a new debt ceiling. What do you expect to happen with regard to that?
Right. Remember, the debt ceiling is to, increase the borrowing limit on spending that's already been approved and already happened. What's interesting in this case is while Democrats and Republicans have approved this before, often with a little bit of debate, this time Republicans are saying, go ahead and raise it, but don't do it with our votes, because ultimately this is about Democratic legislation and Democratic spending priorities that we don't agree with. The Democrats turn around and say, no. This is to pay for things that you passed during the Trump years, Republicans. You got to be on board with this. This is a tricky one and a little more risky because it puts the nation's credit rating at risk. It puts our ability to pay for all government operations at risk as well. Part of what would happen if that spending bill that Dana mentioned gets passed is they would suspend this debt limit until December to try to give it a few more months to see if there's any way to come up with an agreement. But again, even that's at risk of not being able to pass, which means, we're essentially playing and risking the nation's financial health as Democrats and Republicans continue to disagree over these issues.
But Ed, so there's two bills here to talk about, right? There's the bipartisan infrastructure bill, $1.1 trillion, and the partisan $3.5 trillion bill as well. To get that passed, Democrats need all support in the Senate, right, and most in the House. What are the chances that happens?
Well, and that's what's slowing this down. This is why there's so much conversation. The first thing to keep in mind is that the $3.5 trillion price tag likely going to have to come down. You heard the president mention $2.9 trillion yesterday. That's a figure I've heard from Democrats as well. Even bringing it down that little bit might be enough to convince enough moderates to go along with it. We'll see. Ultimately, they believe something will be passed by the end of the year because there's no hard deadline on it. But the longer this goes on, the longer the questions of do we even need it and how much support will there be for it.
Breaking it all down for us in plain speak. Thank you so much, Ed.
Thank you.